Hello, everyone. My name is Claudia Matos Avolesi. I'm a professor for the history of art at the University of Campinas and one of the organizers of the next CIHA World Congress Migrations, which will take place next August in São Paulo, Brazil. In the name of the CIHA Organization Committee, today I want to welcome you to the CIHA Pre-Congress series, Art Worlds of Brazil, a program of 10 lectures created in collaboration with the Clark Art Institute to offer a comprehensive view of the rich and diverse art traditions of Brazil from the colonial period to contemporary art. Art Worlds of Brazil will offer an introduction to the main collections, historical sites, and artworks in the country, critically examined by local art historians specialized in different aspects of Brazilian visual culture. The lectures will be posted once a month for public access on the Clark and CIHA websites, and a closed webinar related to each lecture will be offered to the participants of CIHA World Congress in the week after the posting of each lecture. Whether you will take part in the CIHA World Congress in São Paulo next year or not, we hope that this program will encourage everyone to actively engage with the richness of the visual culture in Brazil and get to know a little more about the scholarship produced by local art historians on this material. Valeria Piccoli is chief curator at the Pinacoteca Museum in São Paulo, which holds one of the most important collections of 19th century art in Brazil. She is an expert in the art of the 19th and early 20th century, with special interest in European traveling artists that came to Brazil. Valeria was one of the main curators of the Terra Foundation exhibition, Picturing the Americas, hosting the show at the Pinacoteca in 2016. Today, Valeria will be presenting the main collections of 19th century art in the country, highlighting specific artworks housed in these collections. So please welcome Valeria Piccoli.
Hello, everyone. My name is Valeria Piccoli. I'm an art historian and a curator at an art museum in São Paulo, Brazil. I was invited by Claudia Matos Avolesi and by Caroline Fowler to talk to you about art institutions that exhibit 19th century Brazilian art. And so this presentation will not be about 19th century Brazilian art, but I will rather invite you to get to know some of the art museums and some of the most important art collections that display 19th century Brazilian art. So I would like to begin this presentation picking up something that my colleague André Tavares said in his lecture, in his presentation that is already available to you at the Clark website. And André Tavares was talking at some point about the connection between art from the colonial period and modern art in Brazil. So most of the historiography about Brazilian art was written from a modernist point of view that left the whole 19th century art in Brazil at some kind of a purgatory, as something that was so indebted to French art that could not even be considered to be Brazilian. So I think this is the same in many parts of the world. So luckily, in the last 20 years, many revisions in historiography narratives deeply altered the scholarship in this field. Well, there's also the difficulties of defining this period, what we call 19th century art in Brazil, as André also highlighted in his talk, referring to the context of colonial art. Usually we consider the 19th century to be like a long period between the arrival of the royal Portuguese family in Rio de Janeiro in 1808, and it lasts until the 1920s, when the celebrations of the centennial of the Brazilian independence happens. So there is a kind of revival of history painting in the 20th century in Brazil that relates to this celebration of, let's say, the 400 years of the so-called discovery of Brazil, and also, and it lasts until the 1920s when the independence is celebrated. I began this presentation with an image of the departure of the Portuguese royal family from Portugal. And we see the King John here, like saying goodbye to his subjects and about to cross the Atlantic to reach Rio de Janeiro in January 1808. And the second image would be one of the first depictions of the life of the royal Portuguese court in Rio de Janeiro. So Rio de Janeiro is suddenly transformed, or something suddenly becomes the center of the Portuguese Empire instead of the capital of a colony. And all the king with all his court and all his entourage just arrive in Rio de Janeiro, like 15,000 people, and the city is completely altered to receive these people that needed to settle there by that time. So what is important to highlight here is that the establishment of the Portuguese court in Rio had important consequences in the cultural life of Brazil, of course. And one of the most important was the creation of a Royal School of Arts and Crafts that later on became the Imperial Academy of Fine Arts. So this is a painting that dates back to 1816 and was made by a French painter called Jean-Baptiste Debré, which is part of a group of French artists that arrived in Rio exactly in 1816. So they left France right after the fall of Napoleon, and they came to Rio de Janeiro to offer their services, let's say, to the Portuguese court here. So, and they were really responsible for the project and the installation and the founding of the Brazilian Fine Arts Academy that began to operate in 1826. And Debré was the professor of history painting in this academy. So he was really responsible for training a whole generation of Brazilian painters in the tradition, let's say, in the European tradition of history painting. And Debré was like this pivotal character in all the events of the founding of the academy. And also he fought really hard, opposing like other artists that wanted to occupy the post of court painter. So he wanted to be the court painter of the first emperor of Brazil, Pedro I. What we see here is the depiction of his coronation as the first emperor of Brazil. So as I said, Debré was a pivotal figure in this and the creation of the academy and the organizing of the first art exhibitions around the production of the artists that were trained at the academy. And he also, when he went back to France, in 1831, he published a book called Voyage pittoresque historique au Brésil, which translates at picturesque and historical travels to Brazil, where he shows himself as the central figure in creating all those symbols around the Brazilian monarchy. So he was the one who designed the crown and also the costumes of the emperor and also the Brazilian flag. So what we see here is his project here down at the right is the project of the Brazilian flag as it was created by Debré after the independence in 1822. And it's the same scheme, or it's the same flag we use today, except that the imperial crest was replaced by the Republican symbol, let's say. Okay, so he had this very important role as really the teacher that initiated the practice of history painting in Brazil, and that trained the first generation of artists here in Brazil. Of course, he was the one teaching history painting, but there were a lot of other, a group of other French artists that were also teaching and training artists around there. But, and I would say that throughout the history of the Academy, they gathered an extensive collection of works of art, and part of this collection arrived in Brazil as a royal collection brought by the Portuguese court, and another group came to Brazil in 1816 with Joachim Liberton, which was the head of this group of French artists to which Debré was related. So, but the larger set of this collection was derived from the Academy itself as the result of its various activities, exercises of students, works sent by pensioners, copies of important works of the masters of European tradition, materials used in workshops, competitions winning works such as the Travel Awards or the prizes of the Academy salons and all that. In 1937, this large collection of the Academy School was split in two parts, and two museological institutions today descend from this original collection of the Academy of Fine Arts. So the museum, the Museo Dom João VI, that holds the part of the collection that had a more didactic character, and the Museu Nacional de Belas Artes, meaning the National Museum of Fine Arts, both in Rio de Janeiro. So what we see here is the way the Museu Dom João VI displays its collection. So it's a university museum today dedicated primarily to teaching and research. So it displays the collection very much as a storage where everything except, of course, works on paper can be assessed by researchers. It also holds important archives and documents that are, very, very important for the study of the teaching methods in the Brazilian Academy and the history of the institution as a whole. So unfortunately, the museum now is closed for renovation, but hopefully it will be open again by the time that the CIHA conference occurs in São Paulo next year. Also, the Museu Nacional de Belas Artes, the National Museum of Fine Arts, which we see now. So I chose like a more nostalgic picture of the building. This dates back from the period where the building was inaugurated, because today it's very hard to actually see the facade of the building because there are many trees and many traffic in front of it, so it's hard to photograph. And I wanted really to point out or to highlight to you the eclectic architecture dating back to 1908. So the building of the National Museum was created to house the National School of Fine Arts that descended from the Academy of Fine Arts. And it was built during the urban modernization of downtown Rio de Janeiro, carried out at the turn of the 20th century. So the building of Avenida Central, which is the Central Avenue, was a part of this project, this big project, and included a series of institutions like the National Library, the Opera House that we see right across the street from the National Museum. So we have at the National Museum a part of the plasters that served as models for the artists to train drawing from models during when the Academy was still, working. And today we can see the most comprehensive, I would say, collection of 19th century Brazilian art here in this museum. And among them, some iconic works of Brazilian art, one of them being the first Mass in Brazil, dated 1860, by Vitor Meirelles. And this is, the first work of history painting that was accepted at a French salon was presented in Paris in 1861, which was like the recognition of the effectiveness of the art teaching of the Academy. So it was a proud for the Academy to have this artist accepted at the Paris Salon at the time. And also we can see at this museum the huge, I would say, battle scenes painted by Pedro Américo, like this one, the Battle of Avaí, which is a depiction of a battle that happened in the 1860s during the war that involved Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. So it's a conflict that's called the War of the Triple Alliance being Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay against Paraguay. I don't have to tell you that Paraguay was devastated by the army forces. So this is one of the depictions of one of those battles. And it's interesting to point out that Pedro Américo and Vitor Meirelles were, the most important artists during 19th century. They would even compete between themselves to be recognized as the most important the painter that had more commissions. And this is very important also to point out that the Academy was intimately related to the Brazilian monarchy at that time. So it depended upon commissions from the imperial government. It depended upon commissions of politics. And of course, when the monarchy ended in 1889, the school went through a huge crisis and almost closed its doors. So it was completely renovated in the 1890, becoming then the National School of Fine Arts. Of course, you can see apart from or besides the iconic works of history painting, you can see also very important works by other artists that were connected to the Academy, like Félix Miltonet, which is also a French painter that was the director of the Academy for many, many years. But then you can see a lot of other subjects, like the depiction of nature, portraiture, sculpture, of course, and many other things in these very extensive collections of 19th century Brazilian art. Another museum I would like to bring your attention to is the Museo Histórico Nacional, the National Historical Museum in Rio de Janeiro. So this museum was created in 1922 for the centennial of the Brazilian independence. And the museum occupies a complex of buildings that date back to the 18th century. And there were buildings that it was like part of the warfare arsenal, the army headquarters, a prison. Many buildings that were connected and became the Museo Histórico Nacional. It houses a huge collection of thousands and thousands of objects, including like numismatic collections of indigenous artifacts, photographs, objects of everyday life, as well as paintings and sculptures, of course. And but what's interesting is that being a history museum, it displays art in connection with other objects of everyday life, like we see here also. a painting that was commissioned by the Brazilian Navy to Vitor Meirelles, and it is displayed with the military uniforms, with a lot of other objects that relate somehow to this historical episode. The same happening here with this painting that is actually a very famous painting. It depicts also a battle in during the war that I referred to, the War of the Triple Alliance, and it was a battle that happened during the night. And in this battle, the Allied forces managed to block like the passage of a river, and so they caught the Paraguayan army and attacked them, and they won this battle just using this chain that is displayed right below the painting, at the bottom of the painting. So and then also you have like the coat of arms of the Brazilian Empire, and also like guns and weapons that were used during this battle. So everything that was connected, that they have connected to the scene that is depicted, they display it together. So it's a very, I think that what is clear here is that the historical museum has very much to do with like a Brazilian military history, much more than Brazilian history. No, so it's all about like battles and the expansions of frontiers and all of this. But in the middle of it, you find good art as well. And also, being a historical museum, they have a session displaying the law that abolished slavery in Brazil. So, I mean, they keep many objects that relate to the signing of this law. But I find it very interesting to say, to be polite, the displaying of this sculpture of an enslaved child, African child, holding like a paper in honor to the emperor and the princess that actually signed the law. So the portrait we see at the back is the Harris princess of Brazil, the princess that was heiress to the throne. And she was the one that signed the abolition law. So, I mean, this child, like honoring the princess is something that thinking in post-colonial terms is something that is not very, something that has to be, I think, revisioned in some way. Still in Rio, or still around Rio, I would call your attention to the Imperial Museum, which stays in Petrópolis, a little town which is about an 1 hour trip from Rio up the mountains. And of course, as you can notice, Petrópolis means the city of Pedro being the emperor. So the city was built in a farm that belonged to the imperial family. And it's where the emperor built his summer palace. So the summer palace gave origin to the museum. So it's a museum that it's very worth a visit in terms of having this palace like kept as a house, really. And you walk through the rooms and you see some art that, some art, mainly like historical scenes like this one we see at the back. And also, for those who like it, a little bit of imperial memorabilia, I would say, like the imperial crown and things like that. So I would say that this is the most visited museum in the country, which is astonishing, but it is anyway. And as you can see, very little of the furniture is actually original from the house, but they keep it like it was like the house that the imperial family occupied in the second half of 19th century. All right, so all those institutions were in Rio, that I mentioned were in Rio, and is actually where you can find, the most important, I would say, the most comprehensive collections of 19th century Brazilian art. Also, private collections are very important in this field in Rio, and some of them can be accessed for art historians and for researchers. So I'll bring the conversation to São Paulo, my hometown now, and we'll begin with the Museo Pauloista, with this image of the Museo Pauloista. So I think that first I have to explain that Paulista means someone who comes from São Paulo, like a New Yorker or like a Texan, or, it designates someone from São Paulo. So Museo Pauloista is the Museum of São Paulo. And it's also a history museum that today belongs to the University of São Paulo. And what's very interesting about it is that it was actually built to be a monument. So all this building is a monument that was created to house this painting, just one painting, to be the house of this painting. So this painting is called Independence or Death, which is supposedly what the then Prince Regent Pedro cried when he declared the independence of Brazil. So here you see, and at the center of the painting, the young prince raising his sword and crying independence or death, and all the army giving him support, to declare Brazil independent. And according to the legend, all this happened at the borders of a small river close to the city of São Paulo, a river called Ipiranga. So the building was actually installed and at the top of a hill, and descending this hill, you find this river where allegedly the independence occurred. So all this monument, all this park, everything was constructed to celebrate the independence of Brazil, and celebrate above all the fact that this independence occurred in São Paulo. So it also added to the myth around the city of São Paulo that has to do with independence, with independence of character, with being like people that look to the future. So that's why, but anyway. They kind of take advantage of the fact that the Modern Art Week happened in São Paulo as well in 1922. So it was like affirming to the rest of Brazil that São Paulo is a place where we look to the future, as opposed to Rio, that is extremely connected to the colonial past, to the imperial power and everything. So this is a little bit of the differences. I think it's important to point the difference between Rio and São Paulo. So so the museum was built, as I said, around this painting that celebrated independence that happened close to the museum, and it was a very important institution that would commission many artists to depict or to create history paintings in the 20th century, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, to celebrate the 100 years of the arrival of the Portuguese in Brazil, the colonizers, and also to celebrate like the founding of the city of São Paulo, this coming together of different people. I think this is the legend that was also created and was extensively depicted in many, many paintings during the whole 19th century and also during the 20th century, celebrating this coming together of different people. So you have the indigenous that look, the natives that look to this priest that is celebrating a mass and consecrating the ground, and all this scene happening in a very Pacific way, which is also not true, but anyway, it was the way it was depicted. So the Museo Pauloista has a very important collection of history, more recent, let's say, history painting, the history painting that was produced in the early years of the 20th century, as opposed to Rio, that is much more connected to the works of the Academy of Fine Arts. And also in São Paulo, I would like to talk a little bit about the Pinacoteca do Estado de São Paulo, which is the São Paulo State Art Gallery, the museum I work for. I have been a curator there for the last 12 years, which is a lot of time. Anyway, and the Pinacoteca was created actually as a room of 26 paintings inside a school of arts and crafts. So all this building was the building occupied by a school of art, and the Pinacoteca was created as a small museum that gathered like good examples of art to serve as models to the students of the school. Eventually, the school had to be moved elsewhere, and the museum, little by little, took over all the building. And now, actually, we have two facilities, so it expanded a lot. And at the Pinacoteca, we can have a look of like also this. Art from 19th century, we have like an important, very important collection of traveler artists, of, let's say, European artists that came to Brazil during the 19th century to depict Brazilian nature mostly, and also Brazilian, everyday life and scenes of on the streets. And I think it happened very much all around the world, but we have an important collection of this, but also a collection of history painting, very much related to the history of São Paulo in particular. So I think that it's not wrong to affirm that while during the 19th century or during the imperial period, you had all this effort to define what could be like this transportation of the European genre of history painting to Brazil, and having this to depict scenes of the local history, and aiming to construct like a national identity, a national history, and all this. And after the Republic, after the 1890s, you can see, or you can recognize an effort in each Brazilian province to build like its own identity, its own history, and affirm the differences between the different provinces. So what happens in São Paulo is that we have this, particularly this artist, Almeida Júnior, and the Pinacoteca holds a large collection of his paintings that dedicated most of his career to to this kind of paintings that were, that took a subject like this peasant life, just like giving or trying to depict the Paulistas or the inhabitants of São Paulo as simple people that were used to hard work and had very little time for leisure, but enjoyed the simple pleasures of life, like playing the guitar, smoking, and enjoyed really the little pleasures of life. But also he was the one who also, the reproduction is not that good, but anyway, what is important here is to see that he was also depicting the scenes of this new bourgeois life that was that was spreading through the Paulista elites. So they were people that were living their past in the country and coming to the city and becoming rich and like constituting like a bourgeois society, let's say. And so all the paintings of Almeida Jr. deal with this tension between these people that were getting rich and ascending, let's say, and this very simple culture, peasant life that was kind of disappearing little by little with all the money that were coming with the coffee plantations that were making São Paulo the wealthiest city in the country at the turn of the 20th century, and was completely transforming the city because São Paulo, like in a very short period of time, just tripled its population with not only people coming from the countryside, but also immigrants arriving from Italy, from Spain, from Japan, from Lebanon, and like building a very cosmopolitan society here, which is, I think, still now the trademark of São Paulo, I would say. Okay, so I arrived here to the youngest museum I will refer today, which is MASP, the Museo de Arte de São Paulo. Assis Chateaubriand is a private museum that was created in 1947 and occupies this building since 1968. So, the building itself, it's worth a visit. It's one of the jewels of modern Brazilian architecture. And although the collection of the museum is actually mostly European art, they have very important and iconic works from the 19th century Brazil, from 19th century Brazilian art. And also what is worth seeing is the very original way they displayed the collection. So the Italian architect, female architect, Lina Bobardi, that designed this building, designed also this way of displaying the works on glass displays. So it's very beautiful when you enter the museum. It's like a mosaic of images you see, and you have to go to navigate them and to discover work by work. So it's very beautiful to see everything like together and superposed. It's a very interesting experience. And as you can see here on your right hand side, you can see like a Delacroix painting, and then an Ingres, a Renoir on the left side. And amongst everyone, you have like this iconic work of 19th century Brazilian art, which is the Moyama. Moyama is also a work by Vitor Meirelles. Vitor Meirelles was the one that depicted the first mass that I just showed you a little while ago. And it's actually the first painting that approaches this romantic idea of the indigenous people in Brazil. So it's Moyama is a character from a Brazilian, from a poem dating back to the 18th century. And it's the classical love story of a woman that dies swimming, trying to reach the ship where her Portuguese lover is leaving back to Portugal. So her body is carried by the waves to the shore again, and she is found dead, as you can see in the painting. So it's a very tragic story, and I think it happens more or less everywhere. I mean, in the US as well, you have those kind of characters, right? And so from Moyama, from 1866, you have a lot of other artists that would approach those literary figures of indigenous women and men and transform them into like iconic paintings during the 19th century. And with this image here, I finish my presentation, actually. I hope it was entertaining enough to make you more curious about Brazil and maybe stimulate you to come next year and take part of the CIHA conference. I hope to have the chance to welcome you at some point in São Paulo, if not during the conference, in a not that distant future, okay? Stay safe, stay well, and thank you very much for your attention, and goodbye.